Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. They're standing shoulder to shoulder in a glass elevator. Their hands are clasped and they're trying not to look like obvious tourists. They're newly married from Chicago, but now they're on their honeymoon in Paris. The wind's louder than they expected. As the lift rises through the iron lattice, the new bride presses closer to the glass. Below them, the Seine River curves like a ribbon. Cars look like toys. The city flattens into geometry. Her husband laughs nervously as he clutches her hand a little tighter. I didn't realize it was this tall. At the top, they shuffle out with a cluster of other strangers, phones out, photos, wind-snapping jackets tight against ribs. Then the tour guide says something that stops them. Up here, she explains, gesturing toward a small, discreet structure behind glass, is a private apartment. An apartment? Up here? The couple lean forward to look through the glass. A desk, wallpaper, a piano, a space designed not for tourists, but for actual living. For Monsieur Eiffel, the guide says. They look at each other. But why did this thing have an apartment? Why would an engineer build himself a private suite at the top of a tower that wasn't supposed to be permanent? And how did the Eiffel Tower, something built for a single World's Fair, become one of the most monetized landmarks on Earth beginning on March 31st, 1989? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, March 31st, that story takes us to 1889, from temporary spectacle to permanent asset. In 1887, before it was iconic, before it was romantic, before it was profitable, the Eiffel Tower was offensive. A petition circulated through Paris signed by some of the most respected cultural figures in France. Writers, composers, architects, painters. They called it a useless and monstrous tower, an industrial smokestack looming over a city of stone facades and cathedral spires. The proposal came from Gustave Eiffel and his engineering firm. The French government had announced a competition for a centerpiece to anchor the 1889 World's Fair, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. Eiffel's design was audacious. Over 1,000 feet tall, nearly 18,000 pieces of iron, more than 2.5 million rivets, built in just over 2 years. But here's the part most people don't know. The contract, the existence of the Eiffel Tower, was only supposed to be for 20 years. After 1909, the city retained the right to dismantle it. This wasn't meant to be a permanent structure. It was spectacle, a temporary revenue engine for a World's Fair designed to attract global visitors, industrial buyers, and national prestige. Construction began in January 1887. Workers climbed skeletal iron in the cold Paris air, balancing on beams as horse-drawn carts delivered prefabricated components from Eiffel's factory. By March 31st, 1889, the tower stood complete, and Eiffel himself climbed the 1,710 steps to the top to raise the French flag. It opened as the tallest man-made structure in the world. Tickets were sold immediately. More than 2 million visitors climbed it during the exposition. And yes, even then there were elevators. From the beginning, hydraulic lifts operated in the legs of the tower, engineered by Otis of the elevator company and French firms to move visitors to the first and second platforms. The machinery itself became part of the attraction. Angled elevator cars gliding upward along curved iron beams. But not everyone rode. There were stairs, hundreds of them between levels. Broad platforms at the first and second floors where visitors could stop, catch their breath, dine in restaurants, and take in the view. The ascent was segmented, not one endless spiral, but stages. Moments to pause, moments to look out over Paris. The climb was not just the transportation, it was part of the product. But once the fair ended, the financial logic became less obvious. What do you do with a 1,000-foot iron tower when the party's over? That question would determine whether this was a failed vanity project or one of the smartest long-horizon infrastructure bets in history.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Is this tree good for climbing? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
By the early 1900s, the exposition crowds were gone. The novelty had faded, the restaurants on the platforms no longer buzzed with international dignitaries, and Paris had returned to being Paris. And the 20-year concession was nearing its end. By 1909, the city could legally dismantle the tower. That was not a symbolic deadline, it was financial. Maintenance costs were real. Iron corrodes, so crews had to repaint the structure regularly to prevent rust. There were insurance and staffing and structural inspections. The question facing the city was simple. Does this asset produce enough ongoing value to justify its upkeep? If not, scrap metal had market value. The land beneath it had developmental value. A temporary spectacle does not automatically become permanent infrastructure. But Gustave Eiffel had been preparing for this moment long before the deadline approached. See, in the 1890s, the tower became a laboratory. Meteorological experiments were conducted from its platforms. Aerodynamic testing was performed. And most importantly, wireless telegraphy began using its height. At that point, radio was new, and signals traveled farther when they were transmitted from a higher elevation. The tower was the tallest structure in Europe. In 1898, successful wireless transmissions were made from the tower across Paris. By the early 1900s, the French military was experimenting with it as a communications platform. That changed the equation. When the 1909 dismantling deadline arrived, the tower was no longer just a tourist structure. It was part of France's emerging communications network. Removing it would mean dismantling a strategic asset and rebuilding that capability somewhere else at far greater cost. Taking it down would not save money, it would destroy leverage. So it stayed. Then came World War I in 1914. That same radio equipment on the tower was used to intercept German communications and coordinate French military responses. What had already justified the structure economically before 1909 now proved essential militarily. The war didn't save the tower. Its second business model had already done that. The war simply confirmed it.
Imagine home. The smell of coffee, the sound of a lawnmower, the sun's warmth on your face. Free to be yourself. Surrounded by love that helps you grow. This is a place to call home. That's an American dream we all deserve. But in 50% of U.S. states, you could legally be denied housing if you are LGBTQ+. Get the facts and hear real stories at lovehasnolabels.com. Brought to you by Love Has No Labels and the Ad Council.
Retirement can be scary, but only if you're not prepared. That's why AARP created thisispretirement.org. Because unless you've already retired, you're in pretirement, and you still have time to plan. Learn about retirement savings options, potential tax breaks, and how you can build savings over time. Visit thisispretirement.org for free resources to help you customize your action plan and feel the retirement fear disappear. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Once the tower proved useful, its future shifted from debate to inevitability. Utility bought time, and time allowed perception to change. What had been mocked in the 1880s as industrial arrogance slowly became Paris itself. Painters began including it in their skylines. Filmmakers framed it as the background of love stories. Postcard printers sold millions of copies bearing its silhouette. The structure that artists once called grotesque became a visual shorthand for France. Tourism layered on top of that cultural shift. By the mid-20th century, the tower was no longer dependent on the World's Fair or military necessity. It had become an attraction in its own right. Restaurants operated year-round, observation decks charged admission, private events rented space. Lighting installations turned it into a nightly spectacle. Each evolution added another revenue stream. Today, more than 7 million visitors purchase tickets annually. The tower generates tens of millions of euros in revenue each year. That supports maintenance, operations, and reinvestment. It's not just preserved history, it's an operating asset. And here is the deeper business lesson. The original financial justification in 1889 was short-term exposition revenue. That model would have expired in 1909, but the infrastructure that adapts can outgrow its first purpose. The Eiffel Tower didn't survive because critics were wrong. It survived because the asset found adjacent value, then layered new value on top of that. And that apartment the newlyweds were staring at, that was never a gimmick. Gustave Eiffel built it for himself, a private office and entertaining space at the summit. He hosted scientists there. Thomas Edison visited in 1889. It was part laboratory, part statement. Eiffel understood something early. If you believe an asset will endure, you build it as if you intend to stay. It was opened on March 31st, 1889. It was granted 20 years, and instead, it became one of the most durable and monetized pieces of civic infrastructure in the modern world. Not because it was loved at the beginning, but because it proved useful long enough to become indispensable. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you're wanting to actually understand business better without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.